Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. My name is Christopher Shepard. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in to this show. We should have a fantastic one ahead for you. Happy early Independence Day yet again. Very much looking forward to that. Hope you guys are too. But today's show, we have a fantastic one. We're going to start off looking ahead to the quarterfinals of the Euros. We've got some mouth-watering clashes coming up in the European Championships. We're also going to be having a surprise segment for you guys commemorating July 4th in a sense. And then we're also going to conclude with some player profiles, a little more of those later on in the show. But before we begin with any of that, I do want to remind you guys to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. We also do receive a ton of tips and donations, so if you do feel so inclined, please consider leaving them at the link gsmc.cloud. It is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole, so anything you leave is greatly appreciated. Also, if you have any burning questions, comments, or concerns about any prior segments I have done, or even segments on today's show, leave them at this link, and they will get addressed at the beginning of the next episode. Without further ado, let's jump right into a mouth-watering segment for you guys today. The Euros Quarterfinals. They are all set, and they will kick off beginning on Friday and going into Saturday. We have some fantastic clashes of European heavyweights everywhere on the docket for you guys, and we're starting off with one that is no different. Perhaps the final before the final. Seems too early for two sides with such European pedigree, both in the Euros and internationally, to meet this early in any sort of competition. Both of them by far looking like the class of the tournament, and they are Germany, the host nations, looking to win, be the first ever host to win since France did it in '88, and Spain, who has kind of made the Euros their tournament in this past couple of decades. And so it should be a clash of titans, true titans, on Friday to kick off this Euros quarterfinal. And so, looking ahead to it, the bookmakers really have no idea who is going to win this game. It's reflected in the odds here. Spain, a little bit favored at plus 155, and Germany at plus 170. So as you can see, Spain's more recent performances might be holding more weight in terms of betting odds, whereas Germany is still in it, perhaps due to the fact that A, they're the host nations, and B, they also have looked very good. And that's the thing about this time when I think of it. Everyone's talking about Spain and how they've evolved past tiki-taka, past you-to-death football, and they have these two dynamic, electrifying wings in Nico Williams and Lamine Yamal, who are both young and exciting. However, they haven't really had a test like Germany. This is as much a test for Spain as it is for Germany. Yes, Germany has a lot of defensive struggles, and they might be coming into question going up against guys like Williams and Yamal. And so that's obviously a concern. But Germany has two bright stars of their own in Jamal Musiala and Florian Wirtz. And also, Germany has way more ways to get them the ball than teams that Spain have faced, such as Italy, Croatia, Albania, and Georgia. Those teams were more focused on allowing their individual players to play. Germany, while yes, they certainly do want individual quality to shine through, they also have the players to get those players the ball. And Jamal Musiala and Florian Wirtz realize it. They're not necessarily going to always be the focal point of this team. It's guys like Kroos picking the balls over the top, quarterbacking the midfield. It's going to be guys like Antonio Rudiger playing physical center-back play and marshalling the back line into some kind of coherence. It could even be a guy like Kai Havertz just creating his movements off the ball to allow them to run into the space. And they understand that to a T. What Spain has to do is realize that, hey, Georgia is Georgia, but Germany are a different animal. They are the host support. Their fans are going to be crazy, and we have to play within ourselves, within our structure, and rely on our two young stars. Can they handle the pressure of playing in a cauldron of noise that isn't necessarily going to be rooting for them? and allow them to do their thing against a defense that, while certainly has been looking much better, is still the most vulnerable part of this Germany squad. And I think it's all going to come down to A, to the coaches, and B, the support. And I think both are in Germany's favor. Julian Nagelsmann has shown that he can adjust throughout the tournament, whereas Luis de la Fuente really hasn't had to make as many changes to impact games as he would like, because Spain has so far been very dominant and hasn't had to worry about subs. So ultimately, what I'm saying is, I think Germany have the edge, not just because of coach, but because of home support. That's the catalyst here. I think the home support has really helped this team as well, because in recent German football history, the home support has been lacking as there's been a downfall in German football and their style of play. But now this team has bolstered support throughout the country yet again, and it has everyone feeling good, and thus that's why I believe you should take Germany in this game. Moving on to a very rough game to predict in England and Switzerland. Obviously, England leading, a miracle saved by the Bellingham goal to advance to the quarterfinal against a Switzerland side who's looking very, very impressive as they progress this tournament. England plus 115, Switzerland only at plus 265. And I really think that's underestimating and undervaluing the Switzerland side. This is perhaps England's most tough matchup, because if you can't break down a low block set up by a team like Slovakia or Slovenia, who don't necessarily have the personnel to do that for that long, you're in big trouble against a team like Switzerland. Switzerland's midfield is one of the most frustrating midfields to play against in this tournament. Their work rate in industry is insane. You have guys like Ruben Vargas, who adds technicality to his physicality. Granit Xhaka, the quarterback of that respective midfield. And Remo Freuler, who's always been underrated in my opinion. And in their backline, Manuel Akanji, Fabian Schär, also very industrious in their style of play. And so looking at this matchup, I really think that England shouldn't be seen as the favorites. I know it's crazy to say, but just based on their tepid, kind of lethargic play throughout this tournament, and because Gareth Southgate can't be relied upon to, truly get the most out of the squad, we've seen England in this tournament in little spurts and stretches be what they know they can be. But they're going to have to do it for a full 90 before I can really say, hey, this team can go all the way and potentially even win the final. Because Switzerland is just a tough team. They're a team that nobody wants to face in this tournament because of how physical they can be. And so I'm taking Switzerland as the underdog in this game. And I really think that they can pull this off, because I'm not as scared as I am of England than I am of them. Moving on to another tasty tie, although these two teams really haven't lived up to expectations at this tournament just yet, in both France and Portugal. France obviously still looking for a level of consistency that really brings out the best in their key players, such as Kylian Mbappe, Ousmane Dembele, those kind of guys. And Portugal as well seem to be stuck between playing with and without Cristiano Ronaldo. They want to include him into their system, but I think he's kind of a distraction from their overall goal, and that is to win this championship. And so this is going to be a very interesting game in terms of the dynamics here, the power struggles. And so I look at France and say, well, they certainly have the balance, but what worries me is that Kylian Mbappe really hasn't gotten going in this tournament. He goes as France goes, and when France are ticking, Kylian Mbappe is at the center of it all. When he's not, I think there just becomes this kind of static sense of play where they're too reliant on Kylian Mbappe. Whereas Portugal, they certainly also have the technicality and flair and nous to compete in this tournament and potentially make the final. But there just seems to be a Cristiano Ronaldo-sized noise in their heads that they can't shake, because they really want Cristiano Ronaldo to go out with a bang. But they just seem to be pressing too hard for him. There's a lot of emotionality in their penalty shootout victory over Slovenia, where you saw Ronaldo getting very tearful after missing a penalty late in extra time. And then the emotionality of the whole penalty shootout where Diogo Costa saved 3 penalties to advance them to this quarterfinal. But I just want to see both of these teams play with some modicum of freedom. Because if you're so trapped in trying to perform, you don't perform. Because football is a game that you have to get lost in. You have to always feel confident and loose whenever you play, or else you tighten up and you tense up, and your team can sense that and they tense up as a result around you. So this game, Portugal at plus 220, France at plus 140, I think is a kind of a toss-up. I'm not going to offer my opinions in terms of how to bet on this game because I truly think that either of these teams are good enough to win. They just have to prove it. And so that's all I really have to say about this tournament game. And finishing up with perhaps the lowest ranked tie amongst all these in the quarterfinals in Turkey and Netherlands. Turkey, impressive victory over Austria nevertheless. Another dark horse contender. And so you can't really underestimate them. They have a strong defensive identity and a star boy themselves in Arda Güler who can get going. But then the Netherlands putting on the most impressive performance to date. Really fantastic interchange of play. You have Cody Gakpo in full force. You have a midfield who's finding uniform and a team with Virgil van Dijk in their defense. It has to be a very scary team to play against. And so I really think Netherlands at minus 165 and Turkey at plus 420 is a really fair rating. However, I do think that Turkey can muck this game up and really frustrate Netherlands and really get to their game and make it very physical, but the Netherlands, I think, just have more flair and excitement to their team, and I think they could go the distance. In terms of predicting who I have in my final, I think it could be a Germany-Netherlands final. I'm not too far-fetched in saying that, but they have to play on the pitch, and we'll definitely see how everything pans out on Friday and Saturday. But coming up next on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, a very special, surprising July 4th segment celebrating tomorrow with a segment of gastronomical proportions, let's say. Tune in to find out exactly what that means in the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast coming up next.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign. A sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign. A sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign. A sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody...
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that first segment. I'm really looking forward to all these quarterfinals in the European Championships. But coming up next, we have a very special, surprising, shocking segment for you guys. And if you're taking the hint, it certainly has a July 4th flavor, July 4th theme to it. And without further ado, I'm going to present it to you guys for the first time ever in the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We are going to be talking about one of the most watched spectacles in American quote-unquote sports. That could also be a hint. We are going to be discussing the Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest betting odds. Now, you're probably thinking I'm crazy for this, but I really think this could be a very interesting segment to talk about, especially in the absence of the legendary Joey Chestnut. We all know that Joey Chestnut is someone who is a legend of hot dog eating in terms of eating as a whole. He really has vaulted professional eating into the stratosphere, gave it the publicity and attention it deserves, and now he's gone from the competition, signing, ironically, with an impossible brand of hot dog, a plant-based hot dog company, thus by disqualifying him from this year's competition. So now I thought it would be interesting to see who will step up in his place and become the undisputed hot dog eating king. Without further ado, let's jump right into these gastronomically appealing candidates. Oh my god, I can't believe I'm doing this. Now, there certainly are a number of contenders, but there are 4 guys who, when I looked at the betting odds for this competition, really stood out to me in terms of their hot dog eating capabilities and other eating prowess and records they have in the world. So without further ado, let's jump right into them. And minus 150, the guy seen as the favorite for this competition this year, the Australian James Webb. Last year, he came in 3rd, far behind Joey Chestnut, nonetheless, at 47 hot dogs and buns. Make of that what you will. It's a pretty impressive feat to consider, but he definitely wasn't in Joey Chestnut's caliber. And this year, however, it's going to look very different. You might have to eat as many hot dogs as the great Joey Chestnut to win this competition. So James Webb, if he even gets into the 50s range in terms of hot dogs eaten, should be fine to be in the top 3 to 5, so to speak, if not winning the whole thing. If it makes you feel any better betting for him, if you do choose to bet on such a weird competition, he does hold the record in donuts and donuts holes. So make of that what you will. I know this is just a very weird thing to compare when we're looking at eating in terms of what it is, and when you're looking at sports so different like football, soccer. So I'm really trying to help you make a justified decision should you choose to bet on this, but it is kind of ridiculous. But James Webb is seen as the favorite. Can he vault from 3rd to 1st in this year's competition? Another guy who's going to be a heavy favorite at plus 110 is Jeffrey Esper. He holds a lot of different world records in Major League eating. Oh god, I can't believe there is such a thing as Major League eating. He holds the world records, though, in Spam, chicken wings in 12 minutes. There are timed events in this world of competitive eating, so that could stand for something. I know that this is a very fast-paced competition. I do believe that the contest overall is in 10 minutes, so speed matters. And then he also holds the world record in corn dogs, which is a variation of a hot dog, so that could be a plus for him, in 3 minutes with 11. That's very impressive for corn dogs, especially. Oh, God. But if you want to look for someone who's a safe bet and can challenge James Webb as the favorite, it should be Jeffrey Esper, because he holds a lot of world records, and he's a very speedy eater, as we can see with all the different competitions where he was timed. But overall, these next 2 guys really intrigue me because they actually are or look like athletes. At plus 1600, these 2 guys are more dark horse candidates for this competition. Bartley Weaver IV. Last year, he ate 40 hot dogs and buns to qualify for the competition, so only 7 behind a guy like James Webb, so he can push himself into that range. But another interesting fun fact about him is he's a mascot for the Tennessee Titans. He is a physical specimen. But in terms of competitive eating, that also could be a detriment, because it's not all about bulk. It's more about how you train yourself to digest that amount of food. And so that's why I don't necessarily believe that Bartley Weaver IV can truly compete to win the entire thing. But I think he's a very interesting contender due to the fact that for someone of his size and strength, he can stomach that many hot dogs at one time in one sitting. But ultimately, I think this next guy is much better seen as a dark horse contender because of his similar build to a guy like Joey Chestnut, and because he's also an athlete as well. And you have to understand one thing. When you're training for something like this event, you kind of have to train like you are a professional athlete. I know that sounds a little weird and crazy, but in this world where you're eating and digesting food at a tremendously fast rate, you really have to train your body to be prepared for that, because you don't want to get up there and upchuck the contents of what you're eating all over the table and make yourself look like a fool, a bigger fool than you already are for competing at a competition like this. But you have to think about it too, from these guys' perspective. They really, truly believe this is a serious sport that they're playing. They don't think this is a joke, a spectacle to be viewed once every blue moon, once every July 4th. They compete year-round. As you see, there's not just world records for hot dogs. There's world records for various kinds of foods. There's a legitimate organization named Major League Eating that certifies itself as one of the top foundations for competitive eating. So you have to take into consideration that these guys, while they certainly might look like athletes, they definitely train themselves for this point. Every single year they're looking to head to each respective competition saying, what do I have to do to make sure that I can break records in terms of eating X amount of food? And so that's what really makes this whole thing very intriguing. Where, I just had a guy named Joey Chestnut who, for many, many years, almost 2 decades, everyone knew he was going to win. Everyone knew. He just had the capacity of an elephant, that he consumed food in bunches, and everyone just tuned in to see what amount of hot dogs and buns he would break, whether he would break his own world record. And that's what made this such a spectacle. But this year I think it's a bit different because Joey Chestnut's no longer there. So the idea of that appeal is gone. You don't have the face of what made this competition so good. You just have this group, this strong collective of contenders who are just very even. And so really finding someone to bet on is going to be difficult because these guys have been doing it for so long and they've done so well in many different areas of eating that I really don't think that there is one true contender. These 4 guys I'm talking to you about right now are seen as either top contenders or dark horses to take that spot, but in this field it's going to be very difficult to separate yourselves. But last but not least, this is my favorite at the very least, mainly due to what I said before. He's similar build to Joey Chestnut, and I think he has the training regimen, no matter how weird that sounds, talking about competitive eating. I keep on saying that. I think that this guy is a true contender in dark horse. At plus 1600, Gideon Oji. He's the tallest athlete in the field. And the reason why I think that matters is because when you are stretching your stomach, right, height matters, right? When you're training yourself to digest that food, height matters because it seems weird, but anatomically speaking, height matters in terms of the digestive system, and I think OG certainly has an interesting advantage in that department. He also ate 38 hot dogs and buns in 2021, where he finished 4th, and he definitely has one of the more healthy world records in this field, with a world record in kale eating. That's a very interesting thing. He also actually did play professional basketball. I believe it was in a French league. So that this does help if you're looking for someone who actually screams athlete and is a true athlete and not just someone who does this as a living. Gideon Oji was actually a true athlete, and he's definitely one of the healthiest competitors in this field. But overall, I think this should be an exciting contest. Obviously, Joey Chestnut, he is going to face Kobayashi in a live hot dog eating contest later in the year, but he's going to be sorely missed because of the fact he brings that intrigue to this spectacle. But with new contenders, I think that anything goes. I'm just so intrigued and excited to be giving you guys this information because I truly wanted this to be a surprising segment and kind of a shocking one as well to kind of start the show. But coming up next, we're going to transition from the world of gastronomical feats to the world of player profiles. We're going to continue with those. And coming up next is a running back who I think is going to have an interesting year with a new team. Find out who it is after the break. Coming up next on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolute.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that very kind of weirdly shocking segment that I just did. I hope you, if you do choose to bet on the Nathan's Hot Dog Eating Contest, that you choose wisely. May the best eater win in that competition. But coming up next, we're going to continue our player profiles, like I said, with a guy who I really want to see get back to what he knows he can be. And that is, without further ado, Austin Ekeler. But before we begin that, actually, I do want to remind you yet again to consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. Is a huge support to both me, my fellow podcasters, and ultimately the network as a whole. So anything you leave is greatly appreciated. But without further ado, like I said, let's jump right into the fantasy player profile of Austin Ekeler. And as we saw, he moved from the LA Chargers, where he had a very inconsistent roller coaster-like start to his career, and now he's a Washington Commander on a new look offense that might rely on him a bit more. So let's just jump right into his fantasy stats for his career, shall we? 1,211 fantasy points. His best season was in 2021, where he garnered 273.8 fantasy points. So as you can see, for a running back, he certainly can put up a ton of points for you in terms of point production. However, if there's one thing that correlates with Austin Ekeler, it's his injury history. His injury history really kind of has derailed what he brings to the table. And last year was no different. He had an ankle sprain in week 1. After the injury, he did average a ton of touches with 16.1, but only 69.8 total yards per game. And he thus ended up being RB28 in terms of fantasy points per game. However, his touches and volume of touches did not go down. He was 8th in target share last year and 19th in yards per route run. So as you can see, he still has the ability to create in both the running and receiving game, and people rely on him. Justin Herbert relied on him last year when he was healthy. But in terms of explosivity and elusiveness, that declined, as a lot of running backs do when they're injured. He was only 38th in yards after contact, 46th in missed tackles. And fantasy odds are projecting him to have kind of a weird and rough season. Only 520 yards for 5 touchdowns for Austin Ekeler, although 432 yards through the air and 2 touchdowns. And another stat of note for you guys to think about, he only finishes the running back 1 4 times post-injury. So as you can see, there is some modicum of concern whenever a guy like Austin Ekeler gets injured, because he definitely does lose that explosivity that we know he can bring to the table. But now, if there's any silver lining to that, is that he's no longer an LA Charger. He's a Washington Commander, and this Commander's offense definitely has a new feel to it. They're going to be breaking in a rookie quarterback in Jaden Daniels, who also brings that dual threat ability to the table. They already have a kind of established running back in Brian Robinson Jr., still a young up-and-coming guy who will get his fair share of touches. And they have a receiving core that's always been very exciting and might be the best part of this team in Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. And they certainly have the feel of a team that A, might be trying to piece things together, but B, looking to be true contenders. And I think they could lean more towards the latter here. I think that the NFC is wide open. I think that the NFC East is always a crapshoot no matter what. Anyone can win that division except for maybe the Giants this year. I'm sorry, Giants fans. But I really do believe that the Washington Commanders are kind of undervalued. And a big part of that is Austin Ekeler. Now, looking at his stats, there's reason to believe that he's going to continue his decline. He's going to regress to the mean. And he's going to be someone who's kind of tossed around in the fantasy rumor mill or waiver wire, what have you. But he definitely adds a dimension to this team that will really make it intriguing and fascinating to see how they implement and utilize both him and Brian Robinson Jr. I think the key to Austin Ekeler is going to be two things this year. What the Washington Commanders do in, say, early downs and what they do in the red zone. Because Jaden Daniels definitely has the potential to be one of, if not the best rookie quarterbacks in this draft class. I think he's in a very similar situation to Caleb Williams, where he has the personnel to immediately succeed. And looking at it from that perspective, I would think that in early downs, Austin Ekeler might be more used, because Austin Ekeler provides that experience, that know-how in the backfield that would probably calm Jaden Daniels down a little bit, not get him too confident, hyper-focused on the task at hand. And so, seeing it from that perspective, I definitely think that if Austin Ekeler truly is the early down back, he certainly won't necessarily be in the top 10 to 15 discussion. However, in the red zone, a lot of opportunities can open up for the Washington Commanders because A, you have Jaden Daniels who can take it in an RPO. You have a guy in Brian Robinson Jr. who's always a workhorse down on the 1 yard line who can get a lot of those looks. You have Terry McLaurin and Jan Dotson, two of the best receivers in terms of contested catches, catching in the red zone, really paying attention to body control in those tight areas. So there's a lot of variety and appeal to what the Washington Commanders can bring in the red zone. And that's going to be integral to how I view Austin Ekeler. Because all is fine and dandy if Austin Ekeler is getting his touches on early downs to just get the tempo going. But I think with a guy like Austin Ekeler, touchdowns is what matters. When he was scoring with the LA Chargers, he was the most electric running back in the league, and he was rivaling Christian McCaffrey as an RB1. A lot of people saw him as 1A even to Christian McCaffrey in the past couple of years, but as we see, the injury bug got to him, and that's not the case anymore. So, in order for me to truly trust Austin Ekeler, I truly believe that he needs to find some kind of control in the red zone, because that's where a lot of his production, I think, could come from. Obviously, you have a guy in Brian Robinson who you can entrust in the red zone because he's a more physical back than Austin Ekeler. But I think that the key to a guy like Austin Ekeler, now, we're going to bring up the fact that he's kind of in his twilight years, and the stop in Washington could prove to just be a bridge to retirement and something like that. But in order to make this worth his while, he really has to understand his place in this team, because Brian Robinson is someone who, if the Washington Commanders ever find themselves having to rebuild, breaking down this project that they're trying to recreate, I think that Brian Robinson is a piece you can't lose. He's going to be a cornerstone of this offense for years to come. And so implementing a guy like Austin Eckler can be a boon, but could also be a detriment to a young running back. So there's a lot to be wary of in this Washington Commanders system, and how head coach Dan Quinn figures that out is definitely going to be something very important to watch should you decide to draft either of these running backs, not just Eckler. And so I do believe that Eckler's not as bad as people think. He's certainly not as bad as only 520 rushing yards, and he's certainly not as bad as only 5 touchdowns, because Austin Eckler, one of his best traits is his explosivity. He's the guy who's going to create elusivity. He's the guy who's going to try and create yards after contact. Obviously, last year was not the perfect example of that, but he's going to try and get back to what he knows best, and that's being the Austin Eckler who can just really get out into the open field and succeed there. I think that the caveat to that is that in this Washington Commanders offense, in order for everyone to be happy, you have to realize that Jaden Daniels is going to have a lot of trust placed on him. And as a rookie quarterback, that kind of makes you a little bit jittery. It kind of makes you a little bit overconfident. It kind of makes you a little bit tight at certain moments. And so, if Jaden Daniels comes into this league and immediately lights it up, those worries will be dispelled. But if he's kind of loose and tense a little bit with how he plays, that will seep into the culture of this whole team. Austin Eckler has already seen one rookie quarterback and his success in the league in Justin Herbert, and he's seen that dynamic in the locker room, and how, what with the dynamic and the coaching staff in LA, the culture kind of got a little bit muddled. Here, it's going to be all about his reactionary attitude towards Jaden Daniels, and thus the reciprocation there, because Jaden Daniels definitely wants someone like Austin Eckler in the backfield, because an Austin Eckler, when he's on his game, is truly one of the best backs in the league, and I mean that sincerely. But as a rookie quarterback on a team that's expecting to compete in the NFC East semi-immediately, but with the moves they made, it's really going to be telling in the early goings for both of these players. And so that's that for Austin Eckler. That should just about do it for him. But coming up next, we have another very interesting player profile where we switch over from running back to wide receivers. Another guy in a new home. A new home there. He might not be the go-to target. Tune in to find out who it is. We'll be right back on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast with that segment.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys are enjoying the show thus far. We are going to continue with our player profiles here with another guy in a new home who might not be in as appealing a situation as an Austin Eckler. And that, without further ado, is Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen, obviously another LA Charger on the move, as they also are trying to revamp their look. But he moves the Chicago Bears, where expectations are higher than they've ever been. They brought in their young rookie franchise quarterback in Caleb Williams, who they truly believe can launch this Chicago Bears team into contender status. They brought in Rome Odunze, another exciting young wide receiver. And they also have DJ Moore at their disposal as well. So overall, a very strong skill position group on paper. Let's see how it translates on the field. But let's just jump right into Keenan Allen, the most intriguing of those wide receivers on that team. Throughout his career, he's accumulated 1,416.3 fantasy points. His best season was in 2017 with the LA Chargers. How time goes by. That just proves how old Keenan Allen is getting. 182.2 fantasy points in that season. Last year, however, was a really nice year for Keenan Allen, considering how kind of inconsistent the LA Chargers were. He was third in fantasy points per game. He was wide receiver 8 overall on a 31% target share. Maybe that's fate of circumstance, and maybe it's because he was definitely the standout receiver on that LA Chargers roster in terms of who they had in their wide receiver room. But it certainly speaks to the fact that he's aging very well. He had a career-high 11.5 targets per game. Again, that could just be the LA Chargers, but still worth noting. He had 8.3 receptions per game, second most in his career. And lastly, and probably most importantly, he was third in PPR points per game. So as you can see, Keenan Allen, the name of the game for him is his longevity. He's always proven that he's going to be someone who you can rely upon for years and years to come. Next year, in the new look Chicago Bears offense, he's projected to have a nice little season. 878 yards, 5 TDs for the year for a total of 119.8 fantasy points. As you can see, fantasy odds are projecting him to kind of decline. And I would say I'm in agreement with them because of the Chicago Bears offense and the big question mark surrounding it. What can they truly be with the weapons they have at their disposal? You bring in Keenan Allen, he's the experience. You bring in Rome Odunze, he's the potential. And you bring in DJ Moore, he's the establishment. That's how I view these three wide receivers in this room. At the quarterback position, you bring in hopefully your franchise QB in Caleb Williams, who truly has the potential to be, in a couple years down the road, one of the best quarterbacks in the entirety of the NFL. But the hugest caveat of all, with any team, both A, bringing rookie talent, and B, trying to build up to be a contender, is that it has to work on the field. Obviously, Keenan Allen could be a huge part of that. Like I said, he's the most experienced out of anyone in that wide receiver room, out of anyone on that offense, for that matter. So he's immediately going to be entrusted with a lot of responsibilities in getting Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze up to speed. But that also could work to his benefit. Because if he's in Caleb Williams' good graces, that means that Caleb Williams not only has a guy on this team who can help him progress, but a guy on his team who can throw the ball to early and often and not be mad about it because he's the most experienced. Whether or not Rome Odunze and DJ Moore will be mad about it is another matter altogether, but Caleb Williams has to know who he's playing with. And right now, Keenan Allen is the guy you really trust in this system. The silver lining to all this is that no matter what, all three of the Chicago Bears wide receivers are going very high in these drafts. In what order I can't necessarily tell you, but that's how deep this wide receiver room is. So no matter what, Keenan Allen will always be in that discussion to go that high. I think all of these Chicago Bears wide receivers will be as well. Here's where I'm kind of caught up, and it's not age on Keenan Allen. It's more about, is he the right experienced receiver for Caleb Williams? Because Keenan Allen kind of takes himself very seriously. He's within himself a lot. He really actually did kind of help Justin Herbert throughout his career, but he also was in a very weird culture in LA where they knew they had the personnel, but fate of circumstance led them to have Brandon Staley as their coach, and we saw that didn't work out. And so, coming to a Chicago Bears squad that's trying to build a positive culture, specifically around a guy like Caleb Williams, it's going to be a very interesting dynamic for Keenan Allen, because He's a guy who hasn't really, come out and been an aggressive person or teammate. He strikes me as kind of a mellow person. In a locker room that's going to have a lot of different personalities, a lot of different wide receivers especially, competing for Caleb Williams' good graces to kind of get him familiarized with this offense, Keenan Allen might be the odd man out. Because A, Caleb Williams has worked out with Rome Odunze before, and he was really thrilled that Chicago went out and picked him up for him. And B, DJ Moore already is an established veteran on this team. He knows the area of Chicago. He knows the offense and what they expect out of them. So Keenan Allen is at a disadvantage in terms of getting to know Caleb Williams. And I don't necessarily think he's going to be outraged about it, because that's not Keenan Allen. But he certainly is going to grow frustrated if he doesn't get his fair share of targets. And thus, that also leads into the culture of this team. If you can build a positive culture where no one feels left out in the squad, that's a fantastic thing to establish your team on. But if you're more focused on, rapport and connections and being buddy-buddy with each other, how is that going to translate on the field? Because you can have all the hype in the world, but it doesn't mean anything if it's not going to translate. And Chicago is a city that immediately wants translation. They are hungry for success. And if Caleb Williams and Rome Odunze aren't that, then Chicago will be merciless in how they treat them. So I think it is highly vital that before anything gets decided on how targets will be split up, I think you have to get everyone in that offense involved in the culture of this team, in the spirit of this team. And I don't necessarily know if that's Keenan Allen's forte, because it certainly felt like, he was kind of left out to dry in LA, to be honest with you. Brandon Staley, didn't necessarily see the potential of this offense. He didn't utilize the best of their ability, and it might have left a negative impact on Keenan Allen, and who knows what mindset he's going to bring to the Bears, but it certainly feels like, as someone who has been around the league a lot, who knows what the importance of culture is, he's going to be a huge factor in the success of this team. Whether or not he's going to be good in fantasy is another story, because he certainly has the consistency to be at least a wide receiver 10 to 15 in this league still. Because, like I said, when you think Keenan Allen, you think longevity. But this is just a different feeling that I have about these Bears. They are definitely starting to feel like a young, youthfully exciting team. And yes, Keenan Allen bringing in to kind of be the mediator of that certainly could be a good move, but Keenan Allen doesn't necessarily want to be in the eye of the storm. I think that Keenan Allen, at the end of the day, just wants to play the game of football and play it well until he decides to hang up his boots. So this season certainly is going to be a weird fantasy season for Keenan Allen, because there might be moments where you say he's still got it, but there might be moments where you say, ooh, I don't know about him. And so I would love to say he's someone who I'm confident in going in the mid-rounds because of his pedigree and name. But in terms of production, I'm going to have to be cautious about letting you guys know that, because he is definitely going to have a very weird season in Chicago Bears locker room that's getting more youthful by the minute. And so that's where I'm going to leave you guys with. That's going to do it for this segment on Keenan Allen. Coming next, we're going to be talking about one of the best tight ends in the league, but is his tight end 1 status in jeopardy? We'll have to find out We'll be right back with that segment to conclude today's show on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast after this break. Hello everyone and welcome back to today's last segment on the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, and it should be a good one because we are going to be talking about one of, if not the best tight ends in the world, in football, in fantasy football, and that, my friends, is Travis Kelce. No matter what, Travis Kelce at the tight end position has A, revolutionized it, and B, made a consistent, solid presence when you have to think about fantasy football. Without Travis Kelce, the position of tight end might be meaningless in fantasy football, but with him, the position is just so much better. So let's just jump right into the fantastic and fascinating career of Travis Kelce. Excuse me. Throughout his career, he's accumulated 1,582.4 fantasy points. His best season was in 2020, the COVID season where a lot of these players have had their best seasons, to be honest, with 207.7 fantasy points. Last year, tied for tight end one with Sam Laporta, so as you can see, like I talked about in a previous segment in this week of shows, where the tight end position is being revolutionized, where you have Travis Kelce's and Sam Laporta's of the world. He was tied with Sam Laporta for tight end one in fantasy points per game. Third in yards per route run, so no signs of declining there. Second in first downs per route run. Third in target share. A huge bulk on a Kansas City Chiefs offense that struggled early on in the season. Second in first read share. So as you can see, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce always being one of those tandems that know they can rely upon each other. 14.8 PPR points per game, though, the fewest since 2016. And, last year was also his first year where he didn't top 1,000 yards. First in over 7 years, so to speak. So, make of that what you will for drafting Travis Kelce. Top 4, though, in targets, catches, and yards. So, there are very high highs and few low lows to nitpick for Travis Kelce. He's just that good. And so, I think what it all comes down to is which side of the tight end revolution you're on. I think it's just as simple as that. Do you want to take Travis Kelce knowing that Patrick Mahomes will always look to him, knowing he's going to get a lot of targets, knowing that he's always going to be a PPR guy, no matter what, points per game says, then take him. But if you want a young up-and-coming tight end like a Sam Laporta, like a Trey McBride, then by all means go for them. They are more unknown, but they've proven that they could maintain their level of success. But I'm in the former camp here because Travis Kelce, is always going to be someone on the Kansas City Chiefs who is going to really elevate this team. I can say that Rashee Rice can merge as Patrick Mahomes' new go-to target. I can say that the additions of Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy really help this offense. But it all starts and ends with Travis Kelce. I think that should anything go wrong next year for the Kansas City Chiefs offense, Patrick Mahomes has the best security blanket in football. And he knows that. He knows that anywhere on the field, that Travis Kelce wants him to be, he will be there. And so that has to count for something. If there is one caveat to Travis Kelce, I definitely think it's age, whereas other guys are not as concerned about it. I think with Travis Kelce, you kind of have to be concerned a little about age. He certainly seems as if he's aging well, but like I said, last year was his first season where he did not top 900 receiving yards. You can say that's the circumstance he was in, where everything about the Kansas City Chiefs offense early on was shaky, but it could also kind of be a mental thing where he's in between kind of checking out of football altogether and wanting to help this team. And I think that he still has that capability within him to elevate this young team. And I think he wants to be the face of this locker room. At the end of the day, if you're a tight end in this league who's been doing it for so long, at a position that requires you to do the dirty work, sometimes that can have a negative effect on you when you're playing this game. And we haven't necessarily seen it from Travis Kelce just yet, but I certainly think that he's in between moments in his career where he certainly seems like off the field he is content with his life. And that might seep into his game a little bit, because there are so many focuses right now in the life of Travis Kelce that football might be the one that he's not necessarily that invested in anymore. And that you can't fault him for that, you know. You think that as a tight end, as a player on a very high-profile team that's scrutinized year in, year out, he's certainly someone who's always in the spotlight, and he's handled it very well. He knows what the media wants and what people want from him. He's the hype guy, but at some point he's going to realize that he has to let that go. Maybe it's not next year. Maybe he wants to continue playing, and maybe, you know, it will always be that way, and no matter what, Patrick Mahomes will always have him as the guy who can bail him out. And so I really think that this year especially is not just a pivotal year for Travis Kelce. It's a pivotal year for the tight end position. Because if Travis Kelce doesn't perform next year, let's just say that he doesn't perform, I really think you have to look at a new era in terms of how we view tight ends, because Travis Kelce, you can just slot into your fantasy team any day of the week and he will perform for you. But looking at these up-and-coming guys like Sam Laporta, who's in a very exciting Lions offense, is becoming someone who Jared Goff can rely upon. And Trey McBride, another guy who's going to really have to step up for this Arizona Cardinals team if they have any hopes of becoming contenders again. I view Travis Kelce as someone who's not necessarily like the father figure of the tight end position, so to speak. Let's just put it that way. I view him as kind of the leader. Like, I view him as kind of the level that everyone's trying to get up to. I don't necessarily view him right now as someone who is appealing in fantasy, as someone who's going to win you fantasy games. Because if you look at the Chiefs' offense and what they want to do, Travis Kelce is a huge part of it. But looking throughout the years at what the Chiefs' offense has become, there certainly seems to be a level of speed and efficiency there. And at some point, having a guy who can just collapse defenses might not matter when you have guys who are just so fast and opposing defenses can't account for them. In many ways, it did work with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce with that dynamic, but that was also when, you know, Chiefs were just becoming what you think of a dynasty. Right now, they're in the midst of the dynasty. And in order to sustain that, they have to make certain decisions about the future of this roster. And one of those decisions is becoming younger. And so, I don't necessarily think that they're going to cut loose Travis Kelce next year or the year after, but it certainly has to be in their consideration. So, right now, Travis Kelce is one of those fantasy tight ends who still has it in him to be a tight end one. But for how long is what really matters to me. I think the Chiefs could be going in a new direction here. I think that with Xavier Worthy, they're like, okay, we want to get back to Tyreek Hill-like efficiency on offense, where you have a speedster who can just take the top off defenses. And so that might be why Travis Kelce is not someone who you look at for next year. And you might dip into the well of younger tight ends. But if you do choose to stay on this path, it could lead you to success at least for 1 or 2 more years. And that is what's truly important, having a tight end who can give you that. But that should just about do it for this edition of today's show. I hope you guys enjoy it. Please like, follow, and subscribe to the show and the network as a whole. Consider leaving a tip or donation at the link gsmc.cloud. My name has been Christopher Shepard. This has been another edition of the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast. We will be back and better than ever with another episode in the very near future. Thank you guys yet again for tuning in.